The Butterfly's Dream by Kerberos 314, Chapter 24. Absolutely not a chapter. Xenographicum. Good morning, Miss Rose. A good morning indeed, now that she could appreciate it. Beautiful sunshine sitting behind iron bars, ever out of reach, and her defenses whittled away to apathy, which couldn't appreciate it anyway. Now, no need to look so glum, the faceless doctor replied in a pre-packaged voice. Today, I think we're going to have the breakthrough we've been looking for all this time. This did earn a response from Ruby, a pained flinch as if bitten. What other torture did they have for her this day? More medicine to make her sick to her stomach and her hair fall out? Another quack to tell her that everything she knew to be true was the product of her deranged mind? That rumored electric therapy which some of the elder patients still mumbled about in her absent deliriums? The department head was contacted by a foreign specialist who claims to have experience in extracting selective things from people's heads, eyeing the man out of the corner of her eye as he absently flipped through the clipboard of paperwork by her bedside, scanning the night nurse's notes. She briefly toyed with the idea of taking the hidden kunai necklace she had hidden away and stabbing the man in the neck, but where would she go from there? What was the point anyway? I'm told she has an excellent track record, even if she is a little eccentric. Perhaps curiosity is what truly stayed her hand, apathy not completely overcoming that desire to live and see what came next. An unaccustomed noise, a putting like a lawnmower drowned out the bird calls outside her window. Even with the throttle gunning it, the engine sounded anemic. Nonetheless, it somehow proved more arresting than an entire army at the doorstep. Oh, I do believe that she's arrived. I'm amazed that she made it here that quickly, though, and on a scooter, no less. Barely overcoming her lethargy, Ruby did something she hardly ever dared to anymore. She leaned over to the window by her bedside, taking in the sight of the open air, which was denied her for some reason. The scene that she tried to banish from her mind of that immaculate green lawn, introduced upon by a garishly yellow scooter that would have been more her sister's fancy if Yang were less of a speed freak. Oh dear! The generic doctor adjusted his spectacles while looking at the same scene. The director isn't going to be happy with what she did to the lawn. Scooter parked obtrusively in the dead center amidst a bullseye of ruts gauged from drifts and turnouts which had somehow been accompanied without anyone noticing. No sign of the rider though. Where did she? Yo! It was the most emotion Ruby had shown in months, ever since her outburst had gotten her locked up in a padded room and dressed to the nines in a straitjacket. She took advantage of her free limbs now, one hand clutching her racing hair and her feet bunching up the sheets in her blind bid to escape the intruder. "How ya doing? I'm Dr. Haruhara, and I'm here to take care of your inconsensive problems." The resemblance the woman bore to a certain pink-haired kunoichi did not make it any easier to banish the startled look from her face, even with her manic smile and facetious salute. Or, in light of them, Ruby did not feel comfortable under her stare, which was closer to that of the patients than the doctor's. Excuse me, but I don't think that's why you're here." Ironically startled by the meek voice of the doctor correcting her diagnosis, the pink-haired woman turned as if noticing the easy, forgettable face for the first time before winding up into a frenzy. "How dare you! I know what I am doing. I am too a legit doctor. See?" Brandishing the name tag on her lab coat didn't do anything to quell their anxiety. "I hate to accuse you of anything, but that's very clearly not yours. What? Further insults? How dare you?" Letting go of the shiny metal nameplate, which very clearly read Smith, the irate woman took up the squashed man by his lapels and pressed her incredulously disturbed stare right up next to his. "I don't have time for this nonsense. I have places to cure, patients to go, so out you go." And with that she tossed the flabbergasted man out the door, which slammed shut behind him. "Now, to deal with you." The strange lady had managed to accomplish one thing in the scant amount of time at the institution, and that was surmounting Ruby's apathy towards life by presenting something even more terrifying than all the tests and programs she'd been subjected to thus far. Try as she might to escape during this opportunity, the woman stood between her and the door, even if it was preferable to try and gnaw her way through the iron bars on her window rather than subject herself to this dangerous insanity. She doubted she'd make sufficient progress. Instead, she hid herself in the far corner under her bed, wary of what this innocuously strong woman could do. Hey now, what's all this? I'm not going to hurt you. Why don't you just come out of there, huh? Against better judgment, Ruby inched her way from the darkness like a spooked beast towards the beckoning hand which, yes, it indeed held the kibble treats. There we are. Now, flinging Ruby back on the bed before she could resist, Haruhara whipped out some rope from again God knew where and hogtied the poor girl. Relax. I've done this like a dozen times. From that same incomprehensible location behind her back, the woman, with her omnipresent chagrin grin on her face, wiped out a Rickenbacker for 4001 left-hand bass guitar, brandishing it like a sword by the instrument's neck. Oh, wait, what are you doing? Didn't I just say to relax? This won't hurt a bit. I take that back, but pain is only temporary, so hiya! Activating her semblance for the first time in months afforded only temporary escape as the incredibly strong guitar cleaved her bed in two. Why didn't you stay still? Don't you want to be cured? No way! Ruby screamed, clinging onto the recessed light fixture for dear life. Never, not before, and certainly not now. No, 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 no! And oh, the cartoonish expression which had dominated Haruhata's features since she'd arrived was momentarily replaced by a brief look of contemplation, during which time Ruby's hand started slipping as the heat from the bulb caused her palm to sweat. What do you know about the NO? What do I know? What do I know? No? Yeah. Huh? Don't play dumb. Just come down here and take your medicine. Replacing the crazed grin on her face, the bubblegum pink woman cocked her weapon back like a slugger just waiting for the pitch, which at this point was inevitable as Ruby's hand couldn't hang on any longer. Ah! Swish! Nuts! Swing and a miss! You're the crazy one here! Ruby cried from the door, jiggling the doorknob in desperation while casting furtive glances behind her. Anybody help! Let me out of here! This woman's nuts! She's gonna... Ah! The metallic blue body of the instrument brushed past the trailing rose petals, caving the reinforced metal door indifferently. Huh! You're pretty fast. Too bad you're nuts. You'd make a pretty good investigator. Previous assessment aside, Ruby latched onto the wrist-thick iron bars in a futile effort to remove them from her own valuable egress. Not too bright, though. Shut up and just let me out. Oh, come on. Don't you want to see Naruto again? As if a plug had been pulled on a wind-up toy, Ruby suddenly quit her struggles, going limp against the metal barrier. How do you know about that? Would you like to would you like to know? Temporarily getting used to the too large smile, seeing something so subtle and unreadable was even more unnerving. Cooperate and you just might find out. Still perched against the bars as if they were a playground set, Ruby stared at Dr. Haruhara with a look that said she was considering the offer. No way! And made a dash for the now open door. Itai! Meh! Come on and take it like a man. Despite the splitting pain in her skull and both hands clutching on her forehead, Ruby managed to glare at the obnoxious pink woman, which would have caused paint to peel, but was all but useless here. Will you at least explain what that was for? Or anything else which had been on her mind right then was very literally shoved aside as a splitting headache racked her whole body. Now, how was that even possible? It felt as if something were trying to claw its way out through that growing bump, and she could only try feebly to hold it back. What? Gah! The bump jutted out like a rhinoceros horn, forcing her hands to her side even as her body convulsed. The spine bent backwards and rising off the ground like a woman possessed, Ruby was forced to obey the invisible commands as her head was jerked back and forth, up and down from within. Then, with a half rip, half shocking sound, the protrusion jutted to the extent that her skin would allow before whatever was underneath burst through and spilled out on the floor. See, there he is, proudly beaming at the pile of fur like it was a newborn baby. Haruko Haruhara paused in throwing herself onto the squirming plushie. What's this? This has never happened before. Poking the wet lump with her trusty all-in-one circular surgical tool and musical maker, she surveyed it skeptically while ignoring the groaning Ruby, who was crawling over to the bedside table to patch up her forehead. Would you stop that? It's alive! It talked! Staring and pointing from opposite sides, the fiery lump unfurled under their accusatory fingers. That isn't Naruto. A fox! Suddenly no longer fearful of whatever had emerged from the girl's head, the woman loomed over the groggy and irate creature before it snapped at her nose. No shit! Shaking like a wet dog. How humiliating. What are you what were you expecting? A TV-faced robot alien from another dimension? Yes, the the fox, which revealed its 9 tails after turning them back on Haruhara, regarded Ruby and the cross-shaped bandage on her forehead. I want to go back. Gah! Bad puppy, get off! I'm not a dog, darn it! Let me back in! Between nuzzling its snout, which really tickled, and scratching at the place it emerged from, which really hurt, the fox's panic was increasing as nothing happened. Well, I feel like my work here is done, so I'll just be going. No, you can't leave me. You caused this. You fix it, wench. Language? Haruko grumbled. All right, I suppose there's one thing I can do. Her fingers snapped, and what was even more shocking than the lights dimming and a spotlight coming on was the serious persona that the pink lady put on. Are you two ready? Ruby and the 9 tailed fox looked at one another and blinked, not sure if they could trust one another, but equally skeptical if they could put their faith in this bizarre character. But it wasn't like they had much choice. Okay, get ready. They braced themselves against one another, clinging on for dear life and whispering, "There's no place like home," over and over again. Let's rock! My Okay, I just want to say before we continue that a song does play here, and it's the first opening of Bleach. So if you want to play that alongside what I'm reading, go ahead. That's pretty much it. On to the story. It shows Naruto sleeping in his bed before it flips over to reveal Ruby sleeping in her bed. Naruto appears once again, but this time he's standing up looking at the screen with a cocky grin on his face. The camera looks at him from a downward angle to reveal Ruby, who's standing a bit away from him and looking into the opposite direction. Team 7 and Ruby appear on the screen, all with various poses. Then one by one, they spin and disappear, except for Naruto and Ruby. Naruto and Ruby are closer now, both of them in their regular clothes. Ruby has a pair of headphones on and her arms crossed as she looks off with a smile on her face. Naruto has his hands behind his back and a cocky grin on his face as he looks in the opposite direction. They disappear and the screen shows various scenes of the Team Ruby and Team 7 going about their day, from Naruto arguing with Sasuke to Ruby sleeping in class while Weiss looks at her angrily. It shows Kakashi reading his book before shifting to Sakura as she puts on a glove, and finally shifting to Sasuke with his hands in his pocket and his Sharingan activated. It flips to reveal Weiss with her hands on her hips before changing to Blake reading a book, and finally Yang with her knuckles slammed together. The scene shifts to Aspen and his teachers all standing in front of Beacon before switching to Tsunade with Jiraiya and Shizune next to her in the Hokage's office. The scene shifts to Cinder back to back with Pain. It shows Naruto and Sasuke arguing and bumping heads, while Sakura seems to be yelling at Naruto about something. Kakashi simply looks at his book and flips a page. It changes to Ruby biting her lip, her sister's arm, while Yang, who has her in a chokehold, Weiss yells at them in the background while Blake simply flips another page in her book. The camera backs out to show both scenarios playing out, to show they both look the exact same almost. It zooms in on Naruto and Ruby's face as they look up in curiosity as if sensing each other. It shows Team 7 running forward, fighting off a team of ninja and winning. Kakashi charges through them with a lightning blade, while Sakura slams her fist in the ground, sending into the air, while Sasuke waited for them with a fireball jutsu. Naruto is seen charging at the biggest one while creating a Rasengan and slamming it into his gut. Team Ruby is fighting off a horde of Grimm with dispatching them easily. It shows the Blake zipping through the Grim, cutting them down before showing Weiss summoning a glyph which freezes multiple Grim. They move back as Yang slams into the ground in a fiery shockwave, shattering the frozen Grim. It shows Ruby going toe to toe with an alpha Beowulf before she speeds around it and leaps into the air and decapitates it. It shows Naruto and Ruby landing at the same time and looking back at their team with wide smiles at their successes. Ruby and Naruto are in the picture diagonal from each other. They slowly look at the screen, Ruby with a calm smile, giving a small wave, and Naruto with a wide grin and his hands behind his back. Suddenly they're in squares. They begin to shift around, so all the other members of Ruby and Seven can be shown on the screen smiling. With a groan he lifted himself out of the disheveled mess that was his bed, musing his tangled charcoal hair, which was in an even sorrier state than his sheets, and heaving a loud, low yawn, those same sheets which then tripped him up and deposited him on the cold wooden floor in a cursing heap. He eventually extracted himself from the trap of his indifferent making, shuffling his way to the bathroom with a litany of mumbled swears on his lips. Those were some bizarre dreams he'd been having of late, and could not fathom what had precipitated them now of all times. Considering he couldn't remember why he felt so hungover either, it was to be expected that there were some things even his genius couldn't solve, and strangely enough, he was cool with that. He was cool with a lot of things, perfectly fine being middle of the pack, laid back, letting others take on the dangerous missions, the glory and the adoration of others, so long as he got his daily fix and wasn't disturbed when he wanted to be. All was well. The only thing which set him off was when someone messed with his important people. That was when heads would roll. Considering his mattress had no head and he couldn't very well do himself in, there was no point in getting upset, even if he did want to curse his past self for getting himself so drunk he couldn't remember when or where it had happened. It would accomplish very little, and was not worth considering this early in the morning, which, judging by the broken clock in the hallway, was always too early. Not bothering to turn on the light in his closet-sized commode, he simultaneously groped for his toothbrush along with something in his pocket to take away the pounding ache. Cigarettes, a booze, it didn't matter which so long as he got it quick. When had his life come to this? Wake up sometime in the afternoon to avoid doing more work than was necessary, and especially those noisy brats he often had to deal with. Do the bare minimum in a day and try his damnedest to keep a low profile. Despite hanging around busty blonde women most of the time, he didn't even care so much for hooking up and was more or less waiting for the right one to come to him, however admittedly unlucky that was. Damn, where the hell is it? Finally giving in to the throbbing pain in his forehead, he clamped down on the toothbrush in his mouth and flicked on the lights, a necessary sacrifice as he was temporarily blinded, and staggered back, hanging his chin on the toilet seat. Shit! He spit the plastic brush out into the sink, along with the brownish glob of toothpaste, cursing and coughing his lungs out. Finally overcoming the pain and now fully awake, he finished rinsing and cupped his hands under the water, bringing the pool up to splash on his face. Letting the cool liquid slap his hardened features, he paused with his hands resting on his cheeks. He thought he had been fully awake, but the foreign feeling of stumbling on his once boyishly smooth face kicked him up into a new level of awareness, honed senses scanning the whole apartment as if an intruder had snuck in during the middle of the night and swapped everything around as a prank. This was a very real possibility, but not even the culprit he suspected would be capable of doing something like this. Would they? Dreading what he would see, nonetheless he slowly acknowledged that he'd have to look in the mirror at some point. A familiar lazy face stared back at him, with eyes that felt familiar, but which were not his usual jaded brown. Instead of the red, the color of countless bottles of plunk, the sort of which he no doubt downed last night. Simultaneously his hands found a pack of cigarettes in his nightshirt and a stainless steel flask resting next to his toothpaste on the sink. Troublesome. It truly was so, whatever it was, but nothing too great that it couldn't be ignored or blanked out by another heavy night of drinking. Taking a swig and popping a cancer stick in his mouth, Shikamaru, Crow whatever his name was, proceeded to kill those brain cells which told him that this was something to freak out over. He lit casually with a match. He scraped off his stubble like he'd seen his master Asuma do a couple of times. So, whose fault is this, you figure, Ruby or Naruto? Yeah, you're right. Probably both. Oh well, the clouds weren't going anywhere, and Aspen didn't need him for another week. He'd enjoyed the clouds from a bird's eye view while it lasted. End of chapter 24.